Hello, my dears. Today we will again look at world events through the lens of political karmology and ask what the universe is teaching us through the stage on which these events unfold. You will not find this unique perspective elsewhere. I can offer this analysis because I have spent decades studying the ancient wisdom of the East in depth and combining it with a strong, wide ranging European education. Today, I share these gifts of knowledge with you for peace within your soul and a conscious understanding of what is happening around us. This is not an attempt to predict the future, divide countries and peoples into good and bad, or pass political judgment. We will try to see which inner processes of humanity are being revealed through outward events. History speaks to us not only through the words of politicians. It speaks through diplomatic meetings and failed ceasefires, military alliances, and humanitarian crises, changes in the climate, and even great celebrations during which millions of people suddenly feel once again that they belong to one human family. The period from June 15th through the end of July 2026 was extraordinarily eventful. World leaders tried to reach agreement in Avian. The United States and Iran moved from the promise of peace toward another dangerous escalation. The war in Ukraine continued to take human lives. NATO countries strengthened their defenses. Humanitarian crisis in Gaza, Sudan, and Haiti reminded us of the price of collective indifference. Europe endured extreme heat. At the same time, people of different cultures and religions met in football stadiums, not to destroy one another, but to compete within the rules of a shared game. These events may appear unrelated, yet deep beneath them they ask humanity the same question. Can we learn to be strong without becoming cruel? From June 15th to 17th, the G7 summit was held in Evian, France. The leaders discussed the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, the global economy, the security of critical resources, migration, emerging technologies, and the protection of children in the digital world. 9 joint statements were adopted. The participants reaffirmed their support for Ukraine and welcomed the preliminary agreement between the United States and Iran, which at that moment offered hope that the conflict might end. The karmic meaning. The summit revealed an important truth about our time. Even the world's most influential nations can no longer solve global problems alone. One country's economy depends on another country's resources. The security of one region affects the price of energy and food elsewhere. A conflict that begins within a limited territory can disrupt trade routes and change the lives of people on the other side of the planet. Humanity became a single organism before it had time to become a single spiritual community. Economically and technologically, we are already connected, yet we have not learned to feel responsible for one another. That is why international meetings often leave a mixed impression. Leaders seek cooperation, but each country still protects its own interests first. From a karmic perspective, this is an examination. Can we move from cooperation forced by necessity to mature interdependence? Not merely, I will cooperate with you because I need you and it serves my interests, but I understand that your destruction will eventually destroy part of my world as well. The lesson for society. Dialogue is not weakness. The ability to sit at the same table with those with whom we have serious disagreements is a sign of political maturity. Yet beautiful declarations are not enough. The real value of international institutions is measured by whether they can protect human life when doing so is inconvenient, expensive, or politically disadvantageous. The lesson for the individual. The same thing happens in our personal lives. Sometimes we speak to another person only because we cannot manage without them. Mature relationships begin when we learn to recognize not only our own benefit, but also the other person's human value. Dialogue does not require us to abandon our convictions. It requires us not to abandon respect. On June 14th, the United Nations welcomed an announced agreement between the United States and Iran. It called for an immediate ceasefire, the resumption of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, and further negotiations. Yet by late June and early July, new military clashes had occurred. On July 8th, the UN Secretary General warned that a return to full-scale hostilities could have catastrophic consequences. By July 12th to 14th, strikes and counterstrikes were once again threatening the diplomatic process and the security of one of the world's most important trade routes. The karmic meaning. This conflict became an almost literal illustration of the central tendency of 2026. Events are accelerating, decisions are made abruptly, and circumstances can change within days. Peace was announced, but the inner fear remained. Distrust did not dissolve. Long-held grievances were not processed or healed. As a result, the overt ceasefire was far weaker than the inner readiness to continue the confrontation. This is the essential difference between a ceasefire and peace. A ceasefire means deciding not to shoot for a time. Peace means changing one's inner relationship to the conflict. As long as each side sees the other only as a threat, any incident can restart the chain of violence. One strike is called a response. That response produces another. Soon, it becomes difficult to tell where defense ended and the perpetuation of war began. The lesson for society. Lasting peace cannot be built solely on fear of mutual destruction. Fear may stop an attack for a while, but it does not create trust. Sustainable peace requires real security guarantees, respect for the dignity of all sides, a way for each side to save face, and a willingness to abandon the goal of completely humiliating or destroying the opponent. The lesson for the individual. We, too, sometimes mistake temporary silence for the resolution of a conflict. We stop arguing, yet continue to hold resentment. We say, everything is fine, while preparing inwardly for the next battle. Such silence is extremely fragile. True reconciliation begins not when a person falls silent, but when they understand their pain, learn the lesson contained within it, and stop using that pain as a weapon. At the end of June, the United Nations reported a rise in civilian casualties in Ukraine and the consequences of systematic attacks on energy infrastructure. On July 7th and 8th, the NATO summit was held in Ankara. Alliance members reaffirmed the principle of collective defense and pledged 70 billion euros in military equipment assistance and training for Ukraine in 2026, while committing to maintain at least a comparable level of support in 2027. At the same time, member states continue to increase their own defense spending. The karmic meaning. This reveals one of the most difficult spiritual dilemmas of our time. How can we defend ourselves against aggression without allowing war to become the sole meaning of existence? The protection of life is necessary. An inability to set a boundary against violence is not kindness. Sometimes softness without strength only opens the way to further aggression. Yet there is another danger. A society that lives under threat for too long gradually begins to see the entire world through the lens of war. Security becomes the highest value. Military readiness becomes the main proof of maturity. The ability to trust, create, and imagine a future begins to look naive. In this way, defense, which should serve life, can gradually replace life itself. The karmic examination is not about renouncing strength. It is about constantly remembering what that strength exists to serve. Not war, not revenge, not the humiliation of another people, but the protection of life, freedom, and human dignity. The lesson for society. A state must be able to protect its citizens, but weapons must not become its spiritual center. True security is built not only by an army, but also by just institutions, education, respect for the individual, economic resilience, and a society's ability not to destroy itself from within. The lesson for the individual. Personal boundaries are necessary too, but a boundary is not a wall of hatred. We can say no without wishing to destroy another person. We can protect ourselves without turning our own pain into permission to hurt everyone around us. Mature strength protects life. Immature strength looks for an excuse to prove its superiority. In Gaza, severe humanitarian conditions persisted throughout June and July. Most of the population remained displaced, aid deliveries were restricted, and humanitarian programs received only a small portion of the funding they required. In Sudan, attacks continued against civilian infrastructure and sites sheltering displaced people. On July 1st, a drone destroyed about 50 metric tons of humanitarian aid intended for thousands in need. In Haiti, renewed clashes between armed groups forced thousands of people from their homes in June. Violence also led to the suspension of maternity services in one of the capital's most densely populated areas, the Karmic meaning. These events are linked not only by human suffering, but by how quickly the world becomes accustomed to someone else's pain. When a tragedy first begins, it provokes a powerful emotional response. Weeks and months pass, headlines change, society grows tired of compassion. What seemed unthinkable yesterday becomes part of the ordinary background. This is one of the most dangerous psychological mechanisms of our time, the normalization of suffering. A person does not necessarily become cruel. More often, they are simply protecting themselves from emotional overload. They tell themselves, there is nothing I can do. It is too far away. There has always been war there. But to the soul, no suffering is distant. If the value of a human life depends on nationality, religion, political position, or media attention, compassion ceases to be a spiritual value and becomes merely a badge of belonging to a group. The lesson for society. The moral maturity of a state and of the international community is measured not only by how they help their allies, it is measured by whether they can protect a person from whom they expect no political or economic benefit. A human life must not become less valuable simply because its tragedy has disappeared from the front pages. The lesson for the individual. We cannot contain all the pain of the world, but neither must we close our hearts. Sometimes it is enough not to speak indifferently about another person's suffering. Help one person. Support a humanitarian organization. Refuse to spread the language of hatred. Do not turn an entire people into a faithless image of the enemy. Compassion cannot always change political reality immediately, but it prevents political reality from destroying our soul. In the second half of June, extreme heat affected much of Europe. According to the Copernicus Climate Change Service, June 2026 was the warmest June on record in Western Europe. The region's average temperature was more than 3 degrees Celsius above the 1991 to 2020 norm. The World Health Organization reported a sharp increase in pressure on emergency services and hospitals. Later data from only several countries suggested that the heat wave may have been associated with nearly 10,000 excess deaths. The karmic meaning. For a long time, humanity treated nature as mere scenery, a source of resources and a space to use, rebuild, and adapt endlessly to our desires. But the planet increasingly reminds us that humanity does not stand above nature. We live within it. A karmic perspective does not mean that extreme heat is punishment from God or nature. That would be a primitive and cruel interpretation, especially toward those who lost their health or loved ones. What we are speaking about is a law of feedback. Every system responds to prolonged pressure. The body responds to neglected needs with illness. The psyche responds with anxiety and exhaustion. Natural systems respond through climate change, disrupted rhythms, and increasingly severe extremes. The planet is not taking revenge, it is showing us the consequences. The lesson for society. Climate maturity is not expressed only through grand promises to reduce emissions. It is shown in the ability to protect the most vulnerable people today: older people, children, those who are ill, those who work outdoors, and those without air conditioning, suitable housing, or access to quality medical care. Environmental policy is not an abstract conversation about the distant future. It is care for human life now. The lesson for the individual. The body is part of nature. It is not required to endure our pace, stress, and neglect forever. Caring for the body, resting, drinking water, seeking shade, and checking on an elderly neighbor may seem like very small actions. Yet a culture of respect for life is formed through precisely such actions. Beginning on June 11th, the FIFA World Cup took place across Canada, Mexico, and the United States, the first tournament with 48 national teams hosted by 3 countries. During the group stage, FIFA fan festivals welcomed more than 5.5 million people. Fans gathered not only in the host countries, but in public squares around the world. The karmic meaning. Against a background of wars, threats, and humanitarian crisis, this event reminds us of another human ability. We can compete without destroying one another. On the football field, every team wants to win. Each has its colors, history, heroes, and dignity. Yet all share one field, common rules, and a limited time for the match. The opponent is necessary for the game itself. Without an opponent, there is no victory, no chance to reveal mastery or discover our strengths. This is an important spiritual image. Another person is not always an obstacle. Sometimes meeting them helps us reveal who we are. War begins where the opponent must be destroyed. Culture begins where we try to surpass the opponent while preserving their human dignity. A truly spiritual and happy society begins where rivalry gives way to cooperation, and where one person's gifts and abilities help reveal the gifts and abilities of another. It is a space where each person's nobility and dignity create a community of happy and free people, a society of aristocrats of spirit. The lesson for society. Humanity needs spaces where collective energy, national dignity, and the desire to compete can take a constructive form, where aggressive rivalry is transformed into creative competition that helps everyone reveal their abilities and develop in an atmosphere of respect and goodwill. Sport, art, science, and culture can direct immense emotional power away from destruction and toward shared development. The lesson for the individual. Not everyone who competes with us is our enemy. Not every defeat is humiliation. Another person's victory does not diminish our value. A mature person knows how to strive beautifully for victory, follow the rules, recognize another person's mastery, and leave the fields of competition without hatred when the game is over. When we bring together the events from mid-June through late July, one picture emerges. At the G7 summit, humanity tried to reach agreement. In the conflict between the United States and Iran, we saw how fragile peace is when it has not become an inner choice. Ukraine and the NATO summit revealed the test of mature strength, defending without making war the highest value. Gaza, Sudan, and Haiti exposed the danger of selective compassion. Europe's heatwave showed that nature will no longer remain a silent background to human ambition. And the FIFA World Cup reminded us that national energy can be expressed through something other than war. The middle of 2026 seemed to place humanity between two forms of strength. The first is the strength of fear. It arms itself, suspects, seeks control, divides the world into friends and enemies, and fears losing face. That is why it cannot stop. The second is the strength of maturity. It also knows how to defend itself, but does not lose its conscience. It can set a boundary while still seeing a soul in the other person. It can compete without destroying, cooperate without losing its identity, and accept responsibility without turning justice into revenge. A quiet message. My dears, when we observe world events, it is very easy to feel small and powerless. It seems that everything is decided by presidents, armies, alliances, and international organizations. To a certain extent, that is true. Yet collective consciousness is formed from the inner states of individual people. It is formed by how we speak to those closest to us, respond to another person's pain, behave in conflict, use our strengths, and treat someone who thinks differently. Each time you refuse to let fear become hatred, you change the collective field. Each time you defend a boundary without humiliation, you show another form of strength. Each time you refuse to pass by suffering with indifference, you preserve what is human in this world. And each time we treat another soul with tenderness and sensitivity, we protect our own soul's connection with God. We cannot immediately stop every war, but we can refuse to let war settle inside us. We cannot change national climate policies alone, but we can care more gently for nature, our bodies, and vulnerable people nearby. We cannot force world leaders to become wiser, but we can pray that fear and the temptation of power do not sever their connection with conscience, and we can strengthen that connection within ourselves. May the events of this period become not a reason for despair, but an invitation to maturity, not to passivity, but to awareness, not to weakness, but to noble strength, not to indifference, but to compassion that knows how to preserve boundaries. And amid the noise of the news, political accusations, and anxious predictions, may each of us preserve an inner space where peace remains possible. A new chapter in human history begins not only at international summits, it begins within the human soul, including yours. Subscribe to our channel and support this video with a like.